Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and today I wanted to take a bit of time to talk about warlocks. Well, more so actually destruction warlocks in Battle of Dazar'alor. I've received so many questions asking why I'm playing destruction on certain fights, and also why it's performing so well, so I figured it'd be best to talk about it here. Now before we jump into that, if you're interested in any of the add-ons or weak auras you see here, I'll have a link to my Twitch and Discord in the description where you can find them all. Now I feel that overall, the initial consensus was that BoD was more or less an affliction raid in the weeks leading up to its actual launch. But if we look at the fights on both Heroic and Mythic over the last few weeks, a great deal of them are actually dominated by Destruction. Let's talk a bit more about Destruction and why it's actually so strong this tier. So one of the things that we spoke about early on heading into the new raid is that Affliction with Inevitable Demise was going to be very strong, and that statement does still hold true in a sense. One of the differences between Uldir and BoD, however, is that on fights where ID was strong in Uldir, the adds typically lived a bit longer. Looking at fights like Mithrax with the mini-boss type ad, Gahun with Cyst, and even Zool where adds would live for a while, there was plenty of opportunities for ID cheesing. Looking at fights in BoD, however, such as Grong, Opulence, Blockade, and certain phases of Jaina, the adds die much quicker than the previous tier, which does not really favor Affliction with ID. The Apetagonizer 3000 adds on Grong, Spirits of Zwen on Jadefire, Raptors on Conclave, and Ice Blocks on Jaina, just to name a few, are priority kill targets that need to die ASAP. One of the greatest strengths of Destruction is that it is the king of two-target cleave. Havoc is an absurdly strong ability on fights with priority ad spawns every so often, and is arguably the best spec to have when it comes to priority burst damage both inside and outside of Havoc windows. Having such a strong toolkit at your disposal is very strong for a great deal of progression based fights. Fights like Jadefire Masters and even Storm of Blockade in a sense are fights where there are pretty much always 2 or more targets present, which means that, barring holding your Havoc for a certain time frame, once Havoc is off CD, it's typically back on CD. The fact that we have 6 actual Azerite trait slots to choose from this tier instead of 3 like last tier, I also feel greatly favors Destruction as a whole. Traits like Chaos Shards and Chaotic Inferno actually provide a strong DPS boost at their first stack, but then lose a good bit of value at 2 and 3 stacks. Having effectively twice the amount of Azerite traits this tier makes finding 1 to 2 spots for them much easier. In a similar sense, Rolling Havoc is a trait that I was a pretty big fan of heading into BoD due to the nature of the fights on both Heroic and Mythic. It's very easy to reach 7 to 9 stacks of the Rolling Havoc buff it grants on fights like Jadefire Masters, Grong, Rastakhan, Blockade, Conclave, and even Jaina, which turns into an extreme DPS game for the remainder of the buff even once the actual adds are dead. Even on fights like Conclave of the Chosen or Grong where you aren't using Havoc on CD, working a Rolling Havoc piece into your Azerite set is pretty easy now and totally worth it. Crashing Chaos is still in a good place, but with it being tied to our 3-minute Infernal cooldown, it makes it effectively a dead trait outside of that window. This has been one of the problems with Crashing Chaos and Destruction as a whole for the duration of BFA, however it was still a great choice in Uldir tuning wise compared to other options most of the time. The biggest difference between BoD and Uldir as far as Destruction goes is just how powerful Flashpoint is this tier. In Uldir, there were not nearly as many ways to abuse Flashpoint as there are this tier, and if there were, Affliction and Demonology towards the end was better suited for the fight more often than not. While Flashpoint might not sim too well, Patchwork sims have only a 20% uptime for the buff, but that's just not the case in BoD. There are certain fights like Champion of the Light, Conclave, Rastakhan, Mechatork, Blockade, and even Jaina, where you can have a pretty high uptime, sometimes even near 90 to 100%, for the duration of the fight. Stacking 2 to 3 Flashpoint traits is like having a mini to actual full Bloodlust or Heroism effect active for the entire fight, which is obviously insanely strong. Even on fights like Grong where there are priority adds that spawn, but their spawn timers are spread out a good bit, you can still gain a good bit of value via Havoc or Rolling Havoc with Flashpoint, as the bonus haste can allow you to squeeze in more cast into that Havoc window. Looking through actual logs and active Flashpoint uptime, these percentages appear to be about the average benchmark for each Mythic encounter. A lot of this can vary depending on your kill time, mechanics, and actual strategy, however. We can see that on Champion of the Light, Conclave of the Chosen, Rastakhan, Mechatork, and Blockade that it's indeed quite easy to maintain a high Flashpoint uptime with very little effort. It's also very important to keep in mind that on fights like Opulence, Jadefire Masters, and Grong, even though Flashpoint's overall uptime is not extremely high, you can proc it on adds or other mobs later into the fight, which often line up with Havoc windows or hard DPS pushes. The thing is, even if you were to take away Flashpoint from Destruction, I still feel that it would be a great choice for a lot of the fights in BoD. Sure, it would lose a lot of value on fights like Champion of the Light and Mechatorque, but the actual fight mechanics would not change. I still feel overall that Affliction with ID is very strong this tier as well, and it can be seen on fights like Conclave, Mechatorque, and a few others. But taking Destruction's strong progression toolkit into account, with there being also just so many ways to abuse Flashpoint and strong rolling Havoc fights present throughout, it's not hard to see why it's become the best progression spec in BoD. At the same time, Demonology is also very strong with the triple explosive potential build at this current point in time, but who knows how long that trait will last in its current form. The thing is, even with Demo being the highest DPS spec overall with optimal gear in BoD, you can either abuse ID or Flashpoint on most fights, which makes them better by default for progression most of the time. Even on fights where you can't, Destruction is still the king of 2-target cleave, and App is still very strong at sustained, spread, multi-dot scenarios. Either way guys, BoD is truly a great tier to be a Warlock. All 3 specs are truly in a great spot, and they all are fun to play. I've actually played each spec at this point in progression, and even though the fights do indeed feel a bit undertuned, I've really enjoyed them from a mechanics perspective. I do expect there to most likely be a bit more class tuning somewhere in the next week or two, but then again, with 8.1.5 on PTR already, Blizzard very well might just be waiting for it to launch to touch class tuning once again. One more time guys, if you're interested in any of the weak auras or add-ons you've seen here, I'll have a link to my Twitch where I stream all of our progression, as well as my Discord in the description where you can find them all. If you guys want to see more WoW content and help support the channel, smash those like, share, and subscribe buttons as your support really helps. Thanks guys, and I'll see y'all in game. Peace.